Hello. Oops. Hello. Today I wanted to make a video about every book I have ever DNF'd. The reason I wanted to make this video is because I realized I forgot to add it into my March wrap-up video, so I thought why not just cover every book I've ever DNF'd and why, and then for my April reading wrap-up I can just add those and then continue on from there. Quick disclaimer, the first half of the books are not in order because my story graph messed up the dates a little bit when I switched over from Goodreads, so just keep that in mind. The first book that we're going to talk about is Neon Gods by Katee Robert. I DNF'd this at page 204 / chapter 15 / 54% into the book. And the reason I DNF'd this is really simple. I am not a smut girly, so even though I was enjoying this book so much, it just became too much for me. Like I said, I don't really enjoy smut that much. I do enjoy it sometimes, but I'm not one of those. I'm not an only smut girly, we can say. So that book was just too much for me. I didn't really enjoy it, and that's fine. I just don't think Katee Robert's an author for me, so that is why I DNF'd it. The next book that I DNF'd was A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. I stopped at page 118 or chapter 16, which is 35% of the way through the book. This book wasn't bad by any means. I really did think that there was a lot of potential for a cute love story. I was intrigued with the plot. I was very excited to read it. However, I did have a few issues with it. My first issue came that I was 50 pages in and I was already trying to figure out what I want to read next and thinking of different books I want to read about, which for me is a sign that I'm not enjoying it, because usually if I'm wrapped up in a book, I don't even want to think about it ending. And then there came points where there were some days that I just tried to avoid reading altogether, which again is another sign that I should probably stop reading the book, because for me, when I enjoy a book, again, I get wrapped up in it. I want to finish it really badly, but not because it's bad, but because I want to know what happens. So the fact that I was thinking about other books was a very clear sign as well that like I'm not enjoying this as much as I should be. The reason I wasn't enjoying it that much though is because there was way too much exposition for my liking, and one thing that really aggravated me was action would start happening in the middle of a chapter and then that chapter would end on a cliffhanger, which is perfectly fine, but then the next chapter would start with her thinking of a memory or her having a dream or something of the sort, and then we would have to wait half of the next chapter for the action to pick back up again. And then by that point, one, I lost interest in what happened to the cliffhanger because I just had to read an entire childhood memory that I did not care about, that did not fit the time. And then the other thing is, a lot of the time the cliffhanger leads up and you think it's going to be something big and explosive, but then it's not. Like, the situation just gets talked through, nothing exciting happens, so you have a cliffhanger that you're forced to wait to find out what happens, and then what happens wasn't even exciting in my opinion, so that's why I DNF'd it and why I didn't like it. The next book that I DNF'd was Starry Eyes by Jenn Bennett? John Bennett? Jenn? I don't know. I stopped at page 81, chapter 7, which is 19% of the way through. I personally don't have anything good to say about this book. I just want to preface that if you like any of these books that I mentioned, that is perfectly okay. You know, my opinion's my opinion, your opinion's your opinion. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean it's bad by any degree. So just like, keep that in mind, and if I mention your favorite book, just skip over it. But Starry Eyes, didn't like it, not at all. I thought Zori was incredibly annoying, and she was a very toxic character with toxic traits, and it was just written off as her being quirky, which did not like at all. And then the other thing was Zori's father, terrible human being, bad person, awful, was written off as he's just stressed. Like, no, mild spoiler, but he nearly beat up a child. Like, he's a teenager, but he's a child. A grown man beating up a child, written off because he's just stressed. He doesn't like his parents. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The next book, which I DNF'd, I was really, really sad to DNF. I was so looking forward to this. I was in the peak of my sports romance phase. I was so sad. But the book is Enemies by Tijan. I stopped at page 173 or chapter 21, which is 47% of the way through the book. It was a very heavy book, but I still enjoyed it. I was excited. I kind of liked the tension a little bit for the beginning of the book, but because it was so heavy and it wasn't getting lighter, like there felt like there were no breaks in terms of sadness and angst and anxiety, was very, very hard for me to get through. I very much struggle with heavy books, you know, because I don't mind heavy parts in my books, and I don't mind sadness and war and whatever, but when the entire book is sad, angry, and heavy without any breaks, I cannot do that. I read to escape those feelings, not to delve into them, you know? So again, mild spoilers, but there was an incident which is very sad and difficult for her, and she chose to deal with that by sleeping with the guy, which again, that's fine. I didn't like that though. I very much felt like she was too vulnerable to be making those choices. For the guy to say yes to sleeping with her, for her to get over her emotions, and well, not even get over, to just not think about them and deal with them, I didn't really like that. I feel like if you care about that person, you shouldn't say yes in a situation like that. Again, my personal opinion, but I just felt like he kind of took advantage of her vulnerability in that point because he was attracted to her and he saw an opportunity, and I did not like that at all. That put me off. And then the other thing was, throughout the book, they very much sprinkle in foreshadowing of different traumas, and there are certain contents that I almost completely refuse to read about. So I didn't Google the trigger warnings beforehand of this book, which, mistake, always Google trigger warnings, but I didn't Google them. And then when I did, I saw what they were, and I decided, you know what, it's already too heavy for me. I don't like that the male character took advantage of her, and now I find out that these trigger warnings are a part of this book. Like, it's just going to get worse. So that is why I decided to put it down. It was just too much for me, and I was already going through a stressful period of time. I did not want to experience that third-party trauma, essentially. Like I said, I was very disappointed to put the book down. However, at the end, it was for my own mental health and emotional well-being, so I don't regret it one bit, and it's been years since I've put it down, and I have no inkling to pick it back up, so I'm very happy about that, at least. The next book that I put down was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, and I stopped at 55%. And honestly, I put it down because I hated it. I did not enjoy a second of listening to it. I picked it up because it was very well liked on TikTok, and TikTok is where I got a lot of my book recommendations from, which I know some people don't like that, but I was getting into reading, so TikTok was really helpful for me. And then also just, there are a lot of good recommendations on TikTok, despite what some people may believe, so that's why I picked it up. I hated every single moment of it. I wanted to like it, I couldn't. I gave it its fair shot. I couldn't go through with it, so I DNF'd it. The next book that I picked up and put down was The Hazelwood by Melissa Elbert, and I stopped at chapter 21 or 59% through the book. I was very disappointed that I had to put it down because I was very excited for it. I saw the book in Barnes & Nobles and I thought the cover was gorgeous, so I found it in my library and I borrowed it, but I couldn't get into it. I got to nearly 60% of the way through and I cannot tell you what happened. Like, as soon as I returned it, could not tell you what happened at all. It's basically almost as if I didn't even read it. So that is why I DNF'd it. I didn't like it, couldn't get into it. Honestly, didn't even know what was happening. So I was really sad, but again, no regrets. So the next book that I put down is either going to be incredibly shocking or not at all. I have heard very mixed reviews and they're all either love it or hate it. This is a very polar opposites series, and that series is, or that book I should say, because I didn't get through the series, but the first book is Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. I'm sorry for that pronunciation. But I stopped at chapter 40, which is 82% of the book. You cannot tell me I did not give this its fair share of a shot. So my feedback is very much like most people who didn't like this book, and it is that it is a recipe book with some plot. Some being like that much. So I felt very bored throughout of the book because of the lack of plot, and I've considered finishing the book and finishing the series so that I can just, understand the hype, have said that I read it, but then I didn't want to read 3 books to say I read it. It was not worth it to me. Again, I was really bored, and quite frankly, the only part of the story I liked was Wrath, and kind of his brothers, the other sins, but mostly Wrath. He was the only part of the book I liked, and it just was not worth reading to me. Kind of wish I DNF'd it sooner, not gonna lie. So the next book that I picked up was Ivy and Bone by R.L. Perez, and I stopped at page 192, which was 53% of the way through the book. I originally picked up this book because I wanted to read a book about demons, and this was one of the only books that I could find that was about demons other than Kingdom of the Wicked, which I'd already DNF'd months prior. It did not scratch the demon itch, shall we say. It's kind of a Hades Persephone retelling, but it made it out to be Hades was a demon because she did a demon summoning, so he came up, so I was like, it counts. But I don't know, it wasn't demon, So it didn't scratch that itch, which sucked in itself. And then in general, I also just didn't like it. I just didn't like it, and it felt like the characters kept having personality changes, which I really, really didn't like. Honestly, that's it. Didn't like the plot, didn't find it interesting, and the characters kept having personality changes, which is annoying. The next book that I DNF'd is very sad to me. I was very, very excited to read the series. I wanted to like it so badly. I really did. And it was very similar to a movie that I loved when I watched it. So I was so excited, but unfortunately it became a DNF, and that book is none other than The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So I stopped with the first book at chapter 46 or 52% through, and I just couldn't see myself finishing this series. I borrowed it at my library, and by the time I had 11 days left, I was only 50% through the book, and it never takes me that long to finish an audiobook unless it's hefty. So as I said, I was listening to the book and I just did not like the narrator. The way she did the Texan accent really bothered me. I also didn't like Avery. I thought she was so annoying, and I just did not care to find out what the secrets were. I was hoping that maybe I could pick it back up in the future, but considering it's been a few months now and I just have no interest, I don't see that happening. If I were to pick it up again, I would definitely read it and not listen to it because personally I just didn't like the narrator, which is fine. She didn't do a bad job or anything. I just was not a fan. The next book that I DNF'd was actually a gift, and I felt so bad about it, but I was already in a reading slump and that book was not helping. And that book is The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. I stopped at page 45 or chapter 5, which is 11% of the way through. And the reason that I stopped reading this was because I genuinely hated everything about it. The Spanish Love Deception for me was a mediocre read. I liked it, but I felt like it was too long, and the smut was something, shall we say. My issue with this book though was the insta love was insane. Oh my god. There was no tension between the characters, like, whatsoever, and they care way too much about what strangers think of them. And again, it felt like they looked at each other and they're like, I will marry this person. Which, calm down. That's something 12-year-olds say. Like, I don't know. I hate insta love in general because I just don't find it realistic. I feel like insta love really usually only applies to preteens and early teens, which is fine, but I didn't like it. And then do not even get me started on her divulging her big secret to him as soon as she meets him. Like, they'd known each other for 5 seconds and she told him her biggest, deepest, darkest secret that she didn't want to tell anyone ever because she was too scared. But then she's like, hey, I've known you for 5 seconds, let me tell you my life story, because that makes sense. I was really sad about that though, because I had been looking forward to reading this book since I found out it was coming out, and when I received it as a gift I was so excited and I couldn't wait to read it. And then I got through chapter 1 and I was disappointed. So yeah, that is very unfortunate. Again, I just think it's one of those things where the author might not be for me. The next DNF is actually quite shocking considering this is one of my favorite series, but it would be A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. I stopped at page 74 or chapter 8, which is 32% of the way through the book. There was nothing wrong with it. I just didn't feel like reading the novella at the time. I read the entire series back to back to back. So by the time I finished Aquawar, I just wanted to get into Silver Flame so that I could finish the series. It was one of those things where it was like, I can't wait to read the next book, but I also am guessing a little tired of the world and would like to take a break. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it put me in such a reading slump because I was out of the world. Should have read the fucking novella. There was nothing wrong with it. I just didn't feel like reading 200 and something pages of fluff, and I wanted to get straight into the action, and it's just a temporary DNF. I'm going to be picking it back up this December, and I think this book will be my Christmas read for the year. The next book that was a DNF is also a very disappointing DNF. This book was one of those books where one day I just woke up and I was like, I want to read it. I really want to read it. And every day for like 2 months, I'm just like, I want to read it. I really want to read it. But I was reading ACOTAR and that whole series, so I wanted to wait until the end. But that book is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmer. I stopped at page 62, which was chapter 9, and that's about 13% of the way through. I do have to say, if I found an audiobook for it, I probably wouldn't have DNF'd it. I would have just put it on like 2 times speed and zoomed through it. But because I was reading it physically, I didn't want to sit through it. It was another book that I was avoiding reading. And again, as I was saying, I could feel that the ACOTAR series put me into a reading slump, and I really didn't want to make it worse by reading a book that I didn't like. The only reason I put it down was because this felt like it was written for the younger side of YA and I couldn't get into it. I don't think there's anything wrong with reading YA as a non-YA person. There are a ton of YAs that I absolutely love. They're my favorite books. However, this one just felt too young for me. It felt like it was written for the 12 to 14-year-old side of it, and I I couldn't get into it, and it's really honestly that simple. There was nothing bad about the book though. The next book that I DNF hurts me physically, emotionally, and mentally because I very stupidly decided, you know what, I'm gonna treat myself. I'm gonna buy the whole series before reading the first book, which don't do that. Don't do it. Please, if you take anything from this video, don't do that, ever. I bought the whole series before I read the first book, and then I didn't like the first book. And now I have the whole series on my shelf, and they're unread, and I hate it, but I don't want to get rid of them because they're really pretty, so I'm probably gonna have to force myself to read the series at some point. But that book is The Iron King by Julia Kagawa. I stopped at page 215, which is chapter 16, which was 50% of the way through. And my issue with the book was that it felt very, 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 very slow. Even during action scenes where they're in the midst of battle, it just felt like nothing was happening. I don't know if that's just me, but I think the issue was that the author tried to put a ton of humor into the book, which normally I love, but it felt like the humor was put into very ill-placed areas. So again, one of the characters would be making jokes as he was going to fight someone, and it just, I don't know. You know, when I'm reading battle scenes, I want that tension. I want that fear of not knowing if they're going to survive. And I think during certain battle scenes, humor can be good. It can be useful. It can be well done. However, I just don't think it was in this book. It felt very slow. It felt like nothing was happening, and it was very disappointing. And then another thing about the characters was that I really didn't like most of them. It almost felt like if they were a picture, their saturation was too bright, and it made them feel very unrealistic, which can be fine in some books, but I didn't think it was fine for this book, if that makes sense. The next book that I DNF'd was a stupid choice to pick up anyway. I am not a dark romance reader. I don't take dark romance seriously because it either disturbs me or it just feels stupid, honestly. Again, if you like dark romance, that's fine. I don't. That book would be Sinners Anonymous by Soames Sketcher, and I stopped at chapter 7, which is 19% of the way through. And for anyone who hasn't read this, this is a mafia romance, which I have mentioned before. Mafia is one of the few tropes that I absolutely cannot take seriously. I never read mafia romances on Wattpad, but I read very similar-esque type romances, and because of that, I just can't read it anymore. And like I said in a previous video, you know, there's nothing wrong with Wattpad writing and books feeling like Wattpad writing. I spent my entire teenage years basically only reading Wattpad. I never picked up a real book. But because of that, I don't want Wattpad-esque writing. I don't enjoy that style anymore, and I personally find that style hard to swallow. I also, in general, just found the characters unlikable, which it's a dark romance, so I feel like that might have been purposeful, but who knows. And then Angelo, the main guy, so dramatic. I couldn't deal with him. He was so dramatic, and it felt like a lot. The next book that I DNF'd was actually a shock for me. I picked it up thinking that I would love it, and I picked it up thinking that this would get me out of my reading slump, which it did. It did do that. I will give it credit for that. But I really thought that I would be in love with this series. I thought it'd be 4 and 5 stars all around, yada yada yada. But I ended up DNFing it, which was very sad for me. So that series would be Of Mist and Shadow by Jenna Wolfhart. I stopped at page 301, which was chapter 32, and it was 66% of the book. So I really did enjoy the book at first. I was very excited to meet the Mist King and see their relationship develop. And the first 100 pages, I ate it up. I read it in a day or two, which at the time I was so busy. So the fact that I was able to read that many pages, like, it just showed how much I was enjoying that book. And then after the first 150 pages, it kind of just fell off for me. I really wanted to try and keep going. I even tried taking a break, but that break just turned into a DNF. And my issue with it was very action-packed, but then they kind of went on a journey, and the rest of the book is that journey to find her family. And it just kind of felt, again, like the same thing that happened with an earlier book. It just felt like even during the action scenes, nothing really was happening. So that is ultimately why I ended up not enjoying it. It just became a bit boring for me. I was very sad to put it down. I was very excited to get into the series, but you know, I stopped enjoying it. And then the final book that I DNF'd up until this current point as I'm filming would be The Playlist by Morgan Elizabeth. I stopped at page 20, which was chapter 3, which was 5% through the book, which I know is very early. I know some people might tell me like, oh, give it more of a chance. But the thing is, I'm a quick DNFer. I have forced myself to read books that I didn't enjoy, and it's just never a good experience. And to me, I always feel like if I don't enjoy a movie, I'm not going to finish it. If I don't enjoy a show or a YouTube video, I'm not going to finish it. So why am I forcing myself to finish a book? Especially when they're the most time consuming. They're the hardest to enjoy. And by hardest, I don't mean most difficult, but just turning your brain off and watching a YouTube video or a show versus trying to read a book. They're two very different experiences. And the reason I DNF'd it is because I found it unlikable, quite frankly. The only reason I picked it up was because it was Taylor Swift inspired, and I love Taylor Swift. My personality is two things, books and Taylor Swift, and that is it. So I only picked up this book because it was Taylor Swift inspired. All of the chapters were Taylor Swift lyrics, and I thought it'd be so cute. I thought it'd be so much fun. I thought I would love it. I thought the characters were so overdramatic. So mild spoilers, but she freaks out because her life is not what she wanted it to be when she was 10, because she found a list that she made when she was 10. Which, I don't know about you guys, but my life is not what I thought it would be when I was 10. When I was 10, I thought I'd be a professional ballerina, and now I have the flexibility of a wombat. I don't know what a wombat is, and I don't know if they're flexible, so if they are, that's gonna be embarrassing. But when I was 5, I thought I'd be a lawyer. When I was 10, I thought I'd be a ballerina. When I was 15, I thought I'd be a computer engineer. I'm none of those things, and that's fine. I just thought it was incredibly overdramatic that she wanted to break up with her boyfriend, quit her job, go on a road trip, all because she found a list when she was 10 and her life looked nothing like it, but her best friends did. And that's the other thing. She was upset because her best friend is trying for a baby and she isn't married and isn't trying with her. And they said, again, when they were 10, that they would have children together. And I just thought that was very stupid because, like, your life is your life, your best friend's life is your best friend's life. You cannot expect to be on the same page as them your entire life. Every life has its different, like, paths and moments and timelines, and that's fine. And I just felt like it was silly for her to base her life off of a list that she made as a literal itsy-bitsy baby. And then the love interest, we met him pretty quickly as well, and I just thought he was weird. And her dad was weird too. She wanted to take a job in New York. Or not wanted to, but she was going to. It's very clear that she hates her life. So her dad goes up to her love interest and tells her, you're guessing an entire week off, go make her fall in love with you so that she doesn't leave the town so that her mom gets to see her every day. That is toxic. So toxic. Like, one, don't try and manipulate your daughter into staying into town so that she can visit her mom every day. She's a grown-ass woman. Do not do that. Her dad made me so mad. He was the reason I actually DNF'd. Her and the love interest I could deal with. Dad, though, And then, again, they've been she's been in love with him, he's been in love with her, like, since, again, they were, like, 10 years old, but it never aligned. I didn't like it. And then, honestly, just me, the Taylor Swift references and everything, I thought I would love. I really truly did, but it just kind of felt fanficky and Wattpad-y, which, if that's what you're looking for, this is the perfect book, but that was not what I was looking for. So ultimately, that is why I decided to DNF the book. However, that is the most recent book that I have DNF'd. And again, I just would like to repeat myself. These are my opinions. If you like any of these books, love any of these books, that's perfectly fine. I obviously mean no offense. These are just my opinions. I am allowed to dislike books that you love, and you are allowed to like books that I hate. And that's perfectly fine. But definitely let me know if you agree with any of my DNFs, or if there are any books that you wished you DNF'd but you didn't, or what your most recent DNF was. I'd definitely be interested in hearing that, and thank you. Bye.